face for radio.
It's my pleasure to greet our today's guest, Professor John Marshall Callahan. Probably nothing to do with James Callahan, the UK Prime Minister.
No.
Okay.
He's got a G in his name here.
Yeah, you're right. Director of International Relations and Homeland Security Programs at the New England College in Henniker,
New Hampshire.
Professor Callahan, thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Pleasure.
At the seat of Slovenian Association for International Relations. Thanks go also to Mrs. Šuštaršič from the US Embassy in Ljubljana, who made us aware of your visit to Slovenia and brought you here, of course. We are a Slovenian organization devoted to conveying international relations topics and affairs into the public domain. Our almost monthly live discussions are accessible on YouTube with links on our website. Since January 2024, very recent, some contributions are available in English. We will strive to step by step enrich this site to go more and more international. Certain international happenings may be seen from our corner of Europe with a clearer eye. Briefly, a few words about us. We all served as diplomats, ambassadors. Dr. Jože Kunic served in Tehran and Paris. Bojan Grabovšek served in Poland, Argentina, Switzerland. Mirko Ziegler, he started his career in China and continued in the United States, studying a little bit, and
seriously studying.
and ended his career in Brussels. Myself, Marjan Šetinc, the president of this association, served in London and Poland. All are writing in the media, occasionally invited to talk on radio and TV, commenting international and diplomatic affairs. Mr. Ziegler stands out with a weekly column in one of the 3 most read Slovenia daily papers. Of course, on politics and security, defense, these days, especially on NATO, approaching 2 anniversaries, Slovenia's 20 years in NATO, and of course, 75 years of NATO. Your academic record is immense. As we read in your CV, there are numerous topics you tackle in the courses for students where you obviously analyze US foreign politics, comparing political, security, economic matters in international relations. Of course, all this is somehow interlinked. Things are lately very dynamic in the international arena. Many armed conflicts and wars all over with no resolution in sight. All these are making world look like a battlefield with a bit of, if I exaggerate a little bit. The last few days, we have witnessed some events which may have far-reaching consequences for international relations. This is for, say, starting our debate. On Monday, United Nations Security Council passed the resolution 2728. You know all about it, I presume. Well, this resolution is interesting for us because Slovenia co-sponsored this resolution with 9 other non-permanent Security Council members. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, in response to US vote, canceled his visit to Washington. immediately. And we may ask ourselves, can Netanyahu afford to snub the US? Will the resolution have any impact on Israel? This is something I'm sure you will be able to comment. Second, mass shooting in Moscow, concert hall. Reactions of Russia and the world. What does it imply? What will be the outcomes beyond Russia? And thirdly, this is, I'm sure, a very fine thing for you. Victoria Nuland's announcement to leave the post of Undersecretary of State, which came as, in brackets, no surprise or surprise. Maybe we witnessed the US cooling down in support to Ukraine. Ms. Nuland, we know, has been heavily involved in Ukraine from the inception of the present conflict in 2013. Do we witness a change in the US foreign politics after her demise? US involvement in Palestine, I mean the whole historic territory, has a very long history. Under President Donald Trump, the United States have recognized the occupied Golan Plateau as an integral part of Israel and moved US embassy to Jerusalem, which has encouraged Israel's land grabbing policies. So that's my personal opinion, which definitely increased violence on the Palestinian settlers, especially on the West Bank. So plenty to comment to kick off our discussion. Maybe Professor Callahan, would you pick up these points for the start?
Sure.
Of course, we all may jump in with questions or remarks. So Professor, the word is yours.
So the first question. UN actions. Yeah. So, well, yeah, the Israelis can say no to the US. Sure, they can for some time. Maybe not even a long time, but they can't do it for long. What they don't have any other friend or a friend with capacity. But the change there, of course, was that the US abstained, and in every other past instance of something like this, the US would have voted no. So that is a pretty significant change. But for me, the bottom line is that Israel is not going to stop until the United States tells them to. And while this is a signal, it is not telling them to. Yeah, that we're not there yet. And Biden doesn't want to do it, I don't think. And this is my academic view, but also as a political scientist, the problem taken in a US election year when the only thing that matters is the US election, you know what I mean? Biden is in deep trouble because the Palestine issue is one of the only things that could shatter the coalition that makes up the Democratic Party. And if you look at that coalition, some of it doesn't make much sense. Like why everybody's in the Democratic grouping, because they're actually opposed to each other. Nevertheless, that grouping exists, and the Palestine issue and Israel's Gaza campaign, it is cracking that coalition. So eventually, Biden's going to have to publicly say no. And I don't know when we get there. It seems to me that he needs to do it sooner than later because of the internal, the way the campaign's going. On the other hand, though, maybe not. The real campaign doesn't begin until August. That's the normal pattern. Every time we have the Olympics, then we have the conventions, and then the real campaign begins. And almost nothing before that matters. So maybe that means he's not forced to say it until the summertime, which has implications, a lot more people are going to die. Terrible implications. Nevertheless, it's an American election year, and that's what we care about, we in the States. So yeah, I mean, it's a big deal. Netanyahu, we're far from the election. And if this were October, then that gamble of not going, that could be a gamble that Trump's going to win, and everything will be okay. But it's also too far away from the election for Netanyahu to do that. Does it make sense?
Mhm.
Because the ability of his allies, of Israel's allies on the American right, which does exist, it's too soon for that. The election hasn't happened. Now but the evangelical crowd, that group of the right, they absolutely unwaveringly support Israel. But it's too soon. The election is not close enough to the election. So the timing is strange and bad, and he probably shouldn't have done it. Yeah.
But I heard comments that apparently the pressure of all the allies in the Security Council, US could not snub them. United Kingdom,
Right.
France,
Yeah.
plus, of course, Slovenia.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, Japan and Korea.
Mhm.
That would be a very difficult matter.
Absolutely.
Of course.
And we want all those people to help us with Ukraine too. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Elections are apparently far, but not so far. I heard Kennedy announced his entry into the campaign.
Yeah. So,
is there any possible change in that direction?
No. Kennedy is about 10 years younger than Trump and Biden, and which
makes a lot of
it's
difference.
a huge deal. And when he did his opening, because I think he started talking about getting into the campaign a few months ago, and he actually almost did a Putin. He did like push-ups. He did a physical verification that he was still fit and all there. But I don't. What's interesting is that his campaign has the potential to draw from both sides. He's not just going to draw. He may, even though he's ostensibly from the left, he may draw more votes from Trump if it goes forward. And maybe he's a beneficiary if something still happens that takes Trump out of the race. I don't think legally, really, there's anything left where they can say you can't run. But if he's damaged by the court trials that remain, then maybe there's an opportunity for Kennedy. But I at this moment, I don't think he's going to be a big factor. Well, but we don't know.
Yeah, to continue on this, I'm sure that you are well aware of the well-known Mr. George Friedman and his thinking about the geopolitics. And recently, in his article, he put emphasis and distinction between American vital interest in Middle East in this war in comparison to, let's say, the big war of 67.
Right.
When the real vital national interest concerning oil was in question, and that in this war, it's just emotion. There is no real vital American interest endangered directly or in comparison to other big players, China and Russia. And his prediction is that actually, well, war is definitely is not about emotion, it's about interest. And that sooner or later, this American emotional fever, if you will, would need to cool down, and that first in the United States and then, of course, also in Europe, German Chancellor sooner or later would follow the suit, and that actually even before American election, fundamental international climate regarding the war in Gaza would change. I'm interested. How
No,
this-
yeah, in terms of international economy, I think that the main thing that has come out of this is the Houthi basically piracy, but that's the closest thing I can see, and that's still not an American vital interest because the world changed, or well, America's energy needs and where we get it have changed since the 60s and 70s. Yeah, and Americans definitely have a finite attention span for this sort of thing too. And if you look at the news at home even now, it's not even on the front anymore. And unless some hospital gets blown up or something very egregious, it has joined Ukraine on maybe it gets 1 minute at the end of the evening news. You know what I mean? Now the social media universe is still much more fired up, but the symbols of American media, interest of papers and the old school television media, they've already sort of moved on from it, which is in a way a problem, because if we sort of lose our focus, then no solution will be found. Like you said, there's no reason to solve a problem that's not a problem, right? Or that people don't perceive to be a vital problem.
Yeah, but you indirectly touched Russia, basically.
Yeah.
So, what's the stance of the U.S. now?
Oh, we just in general on Russia and things.
I mean, with this demise of Victoria Nuland.
Well, I actually I hadn't heard it, but I don't know that tied in with the continued lack of commitment to long-term funding. I'm going to take the point of view that it's dangerous and needs to change. The greatest signal to Russia that the U.S. has a real enduring commitment would be to actually put it in the budget. For Biden every few months to use executive power and say we're going to give some more money, that's something, but putting it in the budget, and then this is the issue, right? This is what the Republicans don't want to do, and that the balance is too close for the Democrats to push through on their own. But it's a funding issue, so it has to come from the House, and the House isn't going to do it. Not yet. I hope that they do soon. So, yeah. I don't. The problem for me is in an election year in the States, you never can know what's a real enduring new policy or what is part of the election year, and that's why I don't want to answer more definitively, because I don't know. Last year, would it have happened? Well, obviously it didn't happen last year. Next year, will it happen if Biden wins? No, I think if Biden wins, that the levels of support will be restored and increase. That's how I see it. So I think it's really the election is screwing everything up, as it does predictably every 4 years. Yeah.
This resignation of Mrs. Nuland got huge coverage by the New York Times and so on. They talk about she was like Kremlin's princess of darkness.
Right.
But at the end, the Spectator gave a final account. The point is, it is entirely conceivable that Nuland's exit could be a reflection of the collapse of the whole architecture of the US-Ukraine strategy, which she designed.
I hope not.
Is it possible that one person has so much power in American administration to cause this kind of turmoil?
I don't really think so.
And I would dare to say that she was removed,
Mhm.
but I'm not. Apparently, the media says she resigned.
Yeah, that's what they always say.
Yeah, of course, but
Even if
she
they're
was.
told to.
She probably went too far. I'm not sure, but being the third person in the State Department
Mhm.
is a huge job.
Absolutely.
So where are we heading now?
Oh, boy. See, and this is where there's no satisfactory answer because it depends how the election goes. It's terrible to say that when that's still 6 months away. And even it's actually, if Trump wins, the change is actually almost a year away. But we won't know. And maybe it'll come out. Maybe this is part of the deal to get the funding through, which would be weird. She's coordinating the activity, but maybe that's it. I don't know.
Oh, okay. The question on Ukraine has impact on various other
Yeah, absolutely.
policies
Yeah.
of the United States.
Yeah.
Um,
Unfortunately, it's another normal part of the presidential election cycle that, as much as it should be, foreign policy is almost never a decisive issue. The economy is always the decisive issue. But that's strange this time because depending on who, essentially, we now even have conflicting partisan impressions of how the economy is doing. By all the official traditional measurements of unemployment and inflation dropping and all, the economy appears to be doing well. But the Republican side would say, well, look, yeah, you can say that those are words, but the evidence of our eyes is different. Like, okay, we have full employment, but that's because so many people have like 5 jobs, and I'm not exaggerating by much, is that really full employment? Is that really a healthy economy? So that argument will be more and more important as we get closer to November. And foreign policy, I think foreign policy will be a topic in this election more than it normally is because Israel's at war. Before the Israel events kicked off, the Ukraine war, though they were going to be topics of discussion, but unless something catastrophic happens, there will never be decisive points. Wars only tend to drive U.S. elections when we're actually in one, and the last time you could see the war really drive an election was the 2002 elections when the Republicans actually won the midterms, which never happens. In the midterms, the president's party always loses, but because of the war on terror, the Republicans actually swept. So anyway, you guys know this, but just to illustrate the point.
Yeah. If I may.
Yeah.
I mean, we are, Mrs. Nalland is being replaced by
I don't even know who's replacing
by some top diplomat who is very heavily involved in Asia.
Okay.
So we are shifting now our debate.
Right. Well, in as much as Biden is Obama too, the pivot to Asia is what they sort of desperately want.
Then we hit economy.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So is that traceable, this huge shift to Asia?
Well, okay. I mean, going back to the Obama pivot, within weeks after Obama announcing the pivot to Asia, the Arab Spring began. And, in the military, they say the enemy gets a vote, right? You have all your plans, but then the other guys have plans too, and their plans are going to be executed. And then Crimea and Donbass happened, and it was almost like Europe and the Middle East saying, "Oh no, stay here." And I say that somewhat sarcastically, but for me, it actually is really important, because for me, the transatlantic military and economic relationship is the foundational international relationship on the planet. There's no more important relationship, and I don't think the U.S. is abandoning it. Far from it, but nothing can replace it, in my opinion. Now, of course, Asia, there's huge economic and security issues in Asia that require attention, but I surely my country must be able to do both. Yeah, so I'm not surprised that the administration would do that and sort of head complete the pivot. On the military side, there's been significant reorganization in that direction. The U.S. Marine Corps, for example, has basically given up tanks. They're focusing completely on the Pacific Islands, their traditional amphibious, role, and so that's one example of us. Yeah, absolutely, pieces are pivoting. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you. Now, Professor Callahan. Now let's put it this way. I mean, we're here with Europe. We're celebrating the state 20 years in NATO, the EU. Now you're touring Europe, right? The States. Europe pretty well. I mean, by
I learn differently every time
Okay. Now, you probably hear, you heard already, people saying, Jesus Christ, I mean, here in Europe, if Trump wins, we don't know what's going to happen. He might abandon us. The Russians are here, right? I mean, Latvia and Poland and so on. And he did that, almost said that, right?
Right.
4 years ago, and that's why it was quite a relief when we saw Mr. Biden coming.
Sure.
What do you respond to this? What do you respond to?
Yeah.
But this pessimism.
So some of it is being hopefully not optimistic and naive. Hopefully, 7 years ago, there was the whole issue of the 2%, and and at that time, there was a quite legitimate point about people living up to the treaties that they signed and all. But of course, it was couched in Trumpian crazy talk. And do you have islands in the Adriatic? Maybe we could buy one, because we tried to buy a very large island off of Denmark, and did some of that talk. Now the point resonated quite well with the American, with not just the American right, but across the board. Like, well, sure, yeah. Why are we paying all the money? I mean, it's perception, right? So we have that, and now we have the rhetoric from a couple of weeks ago about selling countries out that don't want to participate. And like, oh my God, I want to hope that is electioneering, primarily aimed at stirring up his base. Nevertheless, those are words that were put out in the public, and the other alliance members hear them, and maybe there's an intent there to follow up on the 2% thing and push things along. But I want to hope that regardless of what his current intentions may or may not be, I want to hope that the system will at least provide constraints if he does win, even if that really is, the goal. If it's that extreme goal, I would hope that the Congress would stop that there'd be some control from the checks and balances of the system to keep that from happening. Now, so the dark side of it is the Senate could stop him. But the Senate can't stop him from saying, UCOM, your new base is Fort Dix, New Jersey, move there. I mean, he's the commander in chief. There are budgetary implications that, I mean, that wouldn't be quick, or they could, but he does control the armed forces, and he could say, leave. And, you know, that would obviously be a disaster for us, for everybody. I mean, NATO, you remember the old saying that NATO is to keep the Soviets out, the Germans down, but the Americans in, and America needs to be in Europe. For our own benefit, but not speaking, but I think for Europe's benefit too. 1919 proved, or in the 1920s proved, what happens when the US and at that time the UK withdrew. And we can't have that again. And Henry Kissinger's dead. I hope I want to think I'm not just caught in old thing, but I think these things matter. And so it terrifies me that those words, and I want to hope that the system, even if that really is his intent, can restrain him from doing it. But any movement toward that at all would be a major public affairs victory for the Russians. It's clear. And a major win for the AfD and every Eurosceptic and NATO skeptic nationalist group in the continent. So, yeah, it's a terrible answer, but I'm scared.
Well,
Yeah.
we are scared.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
If I might, before, but why is this happening? Look, for decades, Europeans have been complaining that Americans do not understand Europe, they do not know exactly, etc., etc. And now suddenly table turn around. Suddenly we are lost. Rationally, even if we are not really doing business in this international, if we are just an ordinary citizen, the question, what the hell is going on in America? How come that such thing which looks like a real danger both for Europe and for America might get a blessing for American people?
Right.
What is really happening in American society that this is now very realistic possibility to happen in a few months? This basic change, how we were not understood, is now actually even more emphasizing how we are not even close to understand why American society is making this possibility, reality. Huh?
I think that I thought a lot about this exact question in the last 3 days, because I've been talking a lot about the value of NATO and all. And what I think that the US has a historically proven track record that when there is no sufficient outside threat, we go at each other. And we're in a cycle like that. But American society is divided just about down the middle, so 47% on either side. And what used to be that we considered, even going back to the American Revolution, that it was basically in thirds, a third on each side and a third that you fought for in the middle to get elected. Now, it's not even a battle about convincing the other people, because you never will. It's a battle about who can energize their own side to come out more. And in that light, that these terrible statements, I don't want to say they make sense, but you can see why, because he's not going to get any Democratic voter from that, but he wants to make sure that every one of his 47% go. And you see, and so that's the beginning of the problem. The US is there's no diplomacy, there's no science, there's only politics. Everything is politicized. I am convinced, and I have to tell you, I'm a conservative. I've been a Republican in my life, but I'm very sure that the main reason that the Republicans were against supporting Ukraine was just because Biden was for it. there was no research done. Because in a rational world, the Republicans would have been the ones in favor, and so things like that. In the COVID pandemic, the whole mask debate, there was no science. There's no science. The Democrats had their science and the Republicans had their science, and you could pick based on what you believe. And so it's sort of off the wall, but it applies. Everything in the US is divided politically. And I used to say before January 6th, like, well, at least they're not beating each other up in the Capitol building like they did in the 1850s. And then January 6th happened and they do fight in the Capitol. It's like, oh my God, okay, what's where are we headed? I don't have a good answer because it seems in American history like the only thing that will break us out of that is a sufficient threat. And historically, it's looked like that. In the there was no sufficient threat in the 1850s, so we fought ourselves. But social upheaval in the 20s and 30s with the Depression, what brought everybody together? The Second World War, and then what kept us together? The Cold War. I think that the Cold War was a huge factor in fundamental American unity. Not to say that there weren't major social upheavals during the 60s. There were, but the partisanship was not nearly as divisive as it is now, because I don't think it was at the front of their minds back then, but somewhere in their mind was, we have to work together because there's this threat out there. And we can't just bicker about everything. We have to agree on something. And we're what almost a generation and a half removed from the end of the Cold War. I mean, I thought about this, and I mean, and I think I'm in the generation after you, I think, but I'm
Yeah.
let's say, but my grandparents were the ones that fought the Second World War. But I lived in a world of the Second World War. It was all in my life. I mean, my family was military. I lived in in Hampton Roads, a very militarized area. I don't want to say I lived the Second World War, but I was intimately aware of the events of the 1940s because my grandparents lived it, and my father was in Vietnam, and I lived in the very end of the Cold War. And the light bulb for me is like the generations after that. I mean, you have a generation here now that don't even remember independence or how it happened, right? And half the students I've been speaking to don't remember 9/11. And wow, these are the fundamental events. When you probably can answer this, I can't. But when I was a kid, the question was, where were you when JFK was shot? And now you ask the question, where were you on 9/11? And they weren't.
You were very young.
On 9/11? No, I was
So
I was -9 when Kennedy was shot.
that's what I had.
For me, it was when Reagan got shot. That's yeah.
What do you think about the Balkans? Well, we are talking about the crisis in Palestine, Ukraine, but in Europe, there are Balkans, which is a kind of, I wouldn't say problem, but specific situation.
Well,
would you comment?
Yep.
What is your stand?
Yep. Yesterday, one of the students at one of they're running together now. There was a student in one of the events that I spoke at yesterday who was from Serbia. I think he was here on it wouldn't be an Erasmus grant, but he was here for something, and it was a defense and security class. And he kept coming at me on why can't Serbia be in NATO? And what I said was, look, this is a diplomatic issue. It's a political issue inside Serbia, and it's a diplomatic issue in the region. And I don't think that the United States, I think that if the Serbs can convince you all who live here that they are reformed and prepared to be partners, the US, I don't think is going to say no to them being in NATO. But there's also the Kosovo issue, the huge defining issue. But it's like, I didn't want to say to the kid, I mean, my God, not even read a history book, but his point was, well, Serbia has provided support to Ukraine. Okay, sure, but you're also stirring up problems in Kosovo, and historical memory here is much longer than it is in the States. You know, I think probably everybody would agree. And I think that the potential for instability in the Balkans still remains. And a lot of it, the outcome rests on what happens in Ukraine. A dominant Russia that's a pan-Slavic Russia, which they clearly are, that remembers, that has the Ruski Mir concept. And even though Yugoslavia had a special place in the Brotherhood, nevertheless, it was part of it. And I'm quite sure that Russia's sights would be set here, or at least on causing enough instability here to create chaos. And so, yeah, but Serbia is not the only issue, right? How long did it take?
Bosnia.
Right, Bosnia,
Yes.
and I mean, Bosnia, we basically sort of went to war kind of over Bosnia. And yeah, so I have to admit, when I was an undergraduate, all of my research papers were about the situation in Yugoslavia, because it was the 90s, you know, and it was interesting. And I don't even know all the intricacies now in Bosnia. But I gather things haven't changed very much. It's the issues didn't change, right? It's because of the Serbian Republic and the same issues from the 90s, basically. And I don't know how that ends. Yeah.
On Sunday in Serbia, they had a Remembrance Day of NATO pact bombing.
Oh, of course.
Serbia.
Yeah.
And I have been watching the speeches by the President Vučić and President Dodik of Republika Srpska. And President Vučić openly said strongly, we will never join NATO in this speech.
Yeah.
But of course, as long as this Ukraine lasts, they know that there is no option for them to think about NATO. So
it's easy to say.
It's easy. It's impossible to imagine now.
We're never going to join a club that doesn't want us.
But maybe a few things about US versus Europe.
Mhm.
A few days ago, I was looking at the public opinion in the United States about Europe. And there was a question about what is the obligation of the US towards Europe? And over 50% on general are see that US has obligation to defend Europe. Still, this is very strong in the United States. But of course, this is why Europe was very shattered by all these taxes and so on, which gas prices, which are now 4 to 6 times higher than before. The Ukraine, 55% of military equipment today is bought in the United States. US making huge business on Europe. Maybe we know that higher taxes on imports from Europe, German cars, French wines, cheese, and so on, I would dare to claim that all that has brought or higher GDP to the United States.
Yeah.
Plus, of course, taxes on Chinese products and so on.
And the cheap dollar policy, which underlies it. Yeah.
Now, we feel, at least some of us, that US owes us something. Not only that we owe the United States. You should.
I told you this.
No.
But
And vice versa.
I just want to provoke you a little bit.
No,
This
the
is
job of the
direction.
rest of the world is to trade with us and take our dollar so that we can print more and have more stuff. That's what the rest of the world is for.
But
That's my evasion, of
Yeah,
course.
but dollar is not going to last forever.
No, not especially not the way that we're going.
What's the feeling? We know that 70% of dollars are floating outside
Yeah.
the United States.
Yeah.
Or even more.
Yeah.
So tell me, where is the
I don't know.
future?
That's, I don't know. Nationalize it eventually. I don't know.
It's a fair reply. It's a
Yeah.
fair answer.
No,
But doing and
well, on a
Yeah.
train going down a track and
you want to exploit you here, I mean, to have a conversation.
yeah,
Which
absolutely.
is very candid, it's
Yep.
very open, thank you
Yep.
very much. And, you know, I think you're very sincere when you're saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and that's the problem now,
Yep.
is in, you
Yep.
know, the times we are living in. I saw in your, wow, okay, they did mention, the rise of populism.
Mhm. Mhm.
You, and the US, I mean, for many of us, was sort of, you know, the ideal democracy and all that. I mean, it was, that's how it was, I mean. And you yourself, you hinted at the fact that things have changed very much in the US. And so, what about, what's the difference that you mentioned the idea and so on, or these populist parties in Europe, but what the hell are the Republicans? I mean,
Right,
you know, the
right.
old grand
Yep.
party.
Yep.
They're populists, as you
Yep.
said, you know, they want to, excuse me, screw Biden just because he wants the other way
Yep.
around. I mean, isn't that populism?
Oh,
And-
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
is democracy becoming dysfunctional in the United States? Because we want to know it, you know. it
Yeah,
was
no,
always
sure, sure.
there.
I
We
think,
copy it a lot.
I think that whatever happens in November, the next president's only going to serve for 4 years. We're on a track where Trump could do incredible damage to the Republican Party because now he's actually draining the RNC funds to fund his legal problems, which means no money for the House and Senate campaigns, no money for the state legislature campaigns, no money for the gubernatorial races. And if you look back about 15 years, in the 2000s, the Republicans did an amazing job capturing like 2/3 of the state governments and getting victories in the House and Senate. That's because they had a big campaign chest. And if Trump takes away, and this is what Nikki Haley said, and I was definitely a Nikki Haley supporter. Nikki Haley and Chris
Especially
Christie.
in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I was there for that. I was, and then suddenly DeSantis was gone, and it was just her. And it was at my school. There was supposed to it was supposed to be a debate, and it ended up just being DeSantis because she didn't show. But then a few days later, there was supposed to be another one, and he didn't show because he had like dropped out. You know, it's like okay, whatever. But yeah. What was I? What we?
Talk about Republicans.
Yeah.
and
So it's clear to me now that the Republican Party is not going to be able to reform itself until Trump's gone. Now, whether that means that if he wins, the change begins because he's already a lame duck, or if it means that it has to wait if he wins even 4 more years. I mean, it's a catastrophe, but the party is in a place where it has to reinvent itself. And now the hopeful thing, and I mean this sort of in an objective hopefulness, I hope, after those 2002 elections, when those midterms, when the Dems lost everything, the newspapers were all saying, what's the future of the Democrat Party? They couldn't even win in a midterm. Do they have a future? Are they going to disappear? You know, and they didn't. They reinvented themselves. I mean, the party will reinvent itself, or another one will come along. You know what the most successful third party in American history is? The Republicans in 1854, right? Because the Whigs just faded out. You know, and the second most popular or most successful was the Bull Moose Party. But actually, 1912 is also the Republicans, because I think I think Roosevelt got more votes than Taft. You know what I mean? But the point is that I am very hopeful that there will be change. I am less hopeful that the change will be timely when we all need it to happen for a resurgent Republican, reinvigorated but new ideals sort of Republican Party. That might not be as quick as we all need it to be, for sure. And then the Trump dynasty will go the way of the Clinton dynasty and the Bush dynasty into
It's a bit Slovenian.
yeah. Oh my God. Trump said that immigrants were poisoning the country. He's married to a freaking Slovenian. Like, my God, I'm married to a Ukrainian, so I get it. Like, how can you say that?
But let's turn table around. Not in American public. I'm aware that this is not really in their mind, but in your academic society of international thinkers, is there feeling or fear that Europe might abandon the United States? The way as here you can feel a fear of abandoning America, because look, in NATO, of course, nothing can be done because you are a member there.
Right.
But changes in European Union in last 2 years, boy, few more years, they will not need United States anymore.
And
and they will be ready to function in such a way. I talked another day, 2 days ago, round table, and people from European Union say, you can see in European Union corridors in Brussels nowadays as many uniforms as you can see them in NATO.
Oh, sure.
For most of us Europeans, it's still a kind of very exotic thinking, nearly unthinkable, thinking about European security and defense without United States. But as you say, history is full of examples. One alliance fate, another emerges. And so, I mean that this fear of losing transatlantic bandage should be actually both sides. Huh?
Oh, definitely.
It's a big threat to both sides. It's not just that what are going to happen with Europeans without United States. I guess that it would be the same feeling of pretty much isolated in the world of United States without Europe.
And we forget in the U.S. the especially on the far right, but also on the far left, we forget that the liberal world order, it wasn't just built by us, but a part of it was, and it's like, if we're uncomfortable with the world now, wait till the world where we're shut out of it. You know what I mean? And what I tell people at home is like, look, we built this world order and it actually works for us. It's also the greatest and most beneficial world order that has ever been. Maybe Pax Romana was something too, but that's a long time ago. Nothing else has been like that. And we have to actually struggle to keep it. I mean, already we've lost trade blocks. You know, the American, the free world used to be about the free market, and then we let the Chinese into the world WTO. You know, and wow, mistake. Yeah, I think that this brings up all the discussions. Well, first of all, in the Congress to not support, not provide enduring support, but then the rise of discussions in Europe about doing it. On one hand, it's great that the European countries are talking about increasing their own support to Ukraine. I mean, this is a European issue. And for example, shortly before the war broke out, I write commentary for a Spanish newspaper called La Razón. It's a center-right newspaper. And they asked me to write about, you know, what's going to happen if the war comes? And I basically said, the Europeans will probably do nothing and the Americans will have to come in. And then the Europeans will be grateful briefly and then angry because the Americans are not Europeans and we don't share the same perspective. You know, but that was easy for me to say because that's how the record plays for the last 60 years, right? But now flip it around because like you said, turn it over. Okay, Europe's going to support Ukraine more. Okay, good. And then the French are going to send troops in. What? You know what I mean? And you know that's not a place that the United States is prepared to go, and therefore not a place that NATO is going to go, I don't think. And what if they do it? They're on their own, right? No, they wouldn't be on their own, but you know that would be a huge. How can I do a Chatham House rules piece? Or well, whatever. It's fine. I'm going to say it. I recall something that happened in, no, it's okay. I recall something that happened in Sarajevo in 1914 because a weaker alliance, declining alliance power was allowed carte blanche by the main power that started freaking World War I. Now, eventually you got free over it, which is a benefit.
Our grandfather.
Right. I mean, your grandfather. Right.
Grandfather.
Yeah. You know, and that, you know, I just said several very bad things about the French and everything else, but that would be crazy. And that's the risk. That's the risk of if there is not a divorce, but if the US becomes less interested, even if NATO remains, but we are less concerned, there's the risk. And not, it's not that the US is on top and the chess master. It's not the point, but well, we have this alliance that we all agreed to defend each other, but then it goes outside that. You know, what happens next? Because the worst thing ever would be if ever a member called for Article 5 and then it were vetoed. That, which is why they don't do it, which is why the Polish didn't do it when rockets landed in Poland, or the Romanians, same thing. You know, it's like some of the students asked me yesterday about that. It's like, well, you know, well, how come there are clearly examples, or Turkey, when Turkey was invaded, you know, so I shouldn't have put brackets, but yeah, I did. You know, why is it? Because the implication was that Washington called them and said, don't do it. It's like, no. Every member of NATO knows what the tripwires are for every other member, which is a benefit to being in the alliance, right? People know the deal, they know how it works. And you know, if planes are crashing into buildings, you know, and a very overt attack is made, then Article 5 is called. But there are consequences. And anyway, hope that made sense. But you know what I mean? And getting the students to understand that was like, no, it's not like Biden called the Polish and said, don't do it. No, they didn't do it. They know. No.
That's very common
But
perception.
maybe when you world order, Americans made China as well grow, and the Chinese have grown beyond what
What the expectations.
The United States.
All we wanted was somebody to be a third lever against the Soviets. That's all we wanted, you know.
So we have elections in the European Union in June, and there is some worry about the far right gaining a lot.
Sure.
More than it has now. In all, practically in all European countries, the far right is growing. And
newspapers say.
when you said to keep Germany down, and, now Germany is arming, militarizing.
Yeah.
Do we want that? Do we support that? I mean, I tell you, there are people worried about.
Right. Because NATO's about keeping the Germans down.
I mean, it sounds very odd.
No.
But I had experience to talk to a Belgian at the time, just a little bit before unification of Germany.
Yeah, well, that was.
They were so worried that we will never support unification.
Yes, and they did.
No. Okay,
Yeah.
it sounds very odd, but you know, suddenly there is a race in arming Europe.
No, it's not.
With American
Every
equipment.
every strengthening of the army is not militarization. And militarization is political concept, not a military concept.
Right.
So practically the process of scaling up defense is a general process all over the Europe, actually all over the world. And very small part for the time being, we can call it militarization. Most of it at present time is still just military modernization. That's I think it's a danger of this time that we are very easy to move from one, so to say, one set of assessment into a kind of political leveling according to the way we see situation.
So two things come to mind, and one sort of goes back to the last question about alliance leadership. An example comes to me from summer of 2022. Poland wanted to give MiG-29s to Ukraine, and the offer was that, well, they would take the aircraft to Ramstein, to the American base, and then the Ukrainians would get them there. And the Germans kind of lost their minds, you know, like what? That's in Germany. And the implication was, okay, Poland, why can't you just give the planes yourself? And the answer was that they sought leadership from the leader of the alliance. They wanted the Americans to put their stamp on it, because that sends a message, a different kind of message, you know, than even NATO. So there's something about alliance leadership, and the problem that's happening right now with the congressional funding is that, to me, it's great that Europe's talking about their own contributions, but it shows a lack of alliance leadership, and the alliance has to actually become a primary factor if you want it to maintain its credibility. Okay, so that's sort of going back to that answer, but I mean, it seems to me that Europe has a Germany problem. And the world has a Germany problem. And
would you elaborate?
Oh, absolutely. Germany is what, the fourth or fifth economy in the world, and provides absolutely nothing to security. Absolutely nothing. I mean, yeah, okay, they're part of NATO operations, etc. But every other power that's in the top five also provides non-NATO, you know, the British, the French, well, actually the other one that does nothing is China. So you've got the People's Republic of China getting a free pass on provision of global security, which is a huge mistake that we made, but we talked about that already. But Germany, who I would even say reforged the whole European system to serve their economy, provide nothing of security. And we all know why. Part of it is because if they do, they're going to get called Nazis, right? And not just, and even if you were just saying that to incite me, you know, true or not, whatever you think, whatever anybody thinks, a strident, complete Germany would be called, would be criticized for it, and not just by the Russians and the ones, you know, but by everybody who was a victim in the 1940s. And so the U.S. and so who is the military leader of Europe? If it can't be the logical one, which is Germany, then who's left? Us, because the French aren't strong enough. And the other German problem in the European Union is that the British left, because the British were the only ones who provided some sort of contrarian to Germany, and they're gone now. Now that's not true in NATO, but in the European Union, it's definitely true. And I think the European Union, as triumphant as Brussels is, that's because of Brexit. you know?
Wrong grave in nature.
Yeah, right, well, yeah. Keep the Americans in, that's what I say. Yeah.
Spit on that butt. Keep them in.
No, well, you mean us?
Maybe this was the right moment, the right positions
Yeah.
which we brings us to the end.
Do I get to say officially that I do not represent the opinions of the US government? While we're still on recording? Yeah.
Nor do we. The Slovenian
Yeah,
government.
sure.
So this
Yeah, but you
is,
never know where these things end up.
I
I have to
Thank
fly
you.
to Munich tomorrow. I don't want to be blocked at the airport. Who are you?
we are not
Yeah.
pushing you out,
No, sure.
you know, but
No worries, no worries. But I hope we stay in touch because,
I really thank you very
Yeah.
much for this, and we will stay in touch. I had a look at your college. It's climbing the class
yeah,
in
Yes,
in
yes.
in the US
yes.
university
We
ranking.
have a new president who is actually my friend and the guy who brought me in, and he's really on top of it. And the school is really moving forward in a good way, so.
The college is shining.
Yes, yes. And if you ever want, probably you wouldn't consider it to be real skiing, but if you want to have a very gentle skiing experience, the college has a ski slope. So,
The college?
yes, yes.
It's
Well, there's a hill. Maybe you wouldn't even call it a hill. There's a bump near the school that has a partnership.
Anyway,
I mean, I see real hills around here. so.
I thank you very much
Thank you.
in the name of all of us, and I hope we will have a chance one day again.
Oh, I hope so
When
too. I appreciate this because I've been talking to students all week and you guys know stuff. And I had to switch gears. I'm like, oh yeah, right.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.